William Binney, it's such an honor to have you here at the Herland Report. You are a gentleman of impeccable record. You are a true American patriot. You worked with the Army agency 4 years, I do believe, during the Vietnam War. And after that, you transferred to the NSA from 1970 and worked with them from then on. And you are known to be the first and the original whistleblower in the American system years before and way ahead of Edward Snowden.
Yeah, I just wasn't public. I was staying within the channels that you're supposed to. And when you're in government, when you find fraud, corruption, waste, and abuse, there are guidelines on what you're supposed to do to be employed with the U.S. government. You're supposed to report it to the inspector generals and the intelligence committees, which is exactly what I was doing starting in October of 2001. So I was right when I found out about it. That's when I started reporting it. So.
And you quit the NSA
Yes.
a month after 9/11.
That's correct, yeah, because I found out what they were doing. They were basically opening up they actually used our Thinthread software, the program we had developed internally in NSA, to collect and store everything on everybody. First starting in the US, because we were the closest. We were right here, you know. So, and they had cooperation with AT&T and Verizon and various other telecommunications companies, so they let them into their buildings and put in rooms and basically put in devices that would duplicate the lines, the optical fiber lines. It's like if you take a prism and pass a light through it, it will duplicate it in two directions. So they were taking one, and the other one they let go down the proper communications path. And that they started shortly after, initially they started taking in the metadata from the telecommunications companies.
But you're the man that invented the metadata.
And then, but that extended to content. Now, we were doing both metadata and content, but only of targets. In other words, we were able to, with our Thinthread program, to pick the needles out of the haystack. And anything that might relate to those needles. We would pull only that, and everything else we'd just like go right by. So we could manage multiple fiber collections with like a standard 64 kilobit telephone line. All the data, all the metadata, all that stuff coming down that phone line, that's all we needed. So we wouldn't have to build large storage facilities or anything. And see, the problem was that in the 90s, NSA was going into the digital age, taking and collecting data, and that was burying the people. Even then, with their, you know, the capability wasn't that great to collect it. But even then it was burying them, and they couldn't see what was happening. They couldn't see threats coming. And that was their big complaint when I was their technical director. You know, I could see this as the major issue. So that's when I said, well, okay, we have to figure a way out to pull only relevant data and only give the relevant data to our analysts. Nothing else that isn't relevant, you know, should be there, because it buries them and they can't see what's going on. So that's what we devised with the Thinthread program. And it effectively worked. But in order to do that, you see, you had to first put things together to be able to look at them to say, is this something I want, yes or no? And if you say yes, you take it in. If no, you let it go right by. So, but that gave them the capability to say yes to everything. And so they could pull everything. That was one of the first things they removed from our program to do the worldwide collection on the first US citizens, then everybody else. First thing they removed was that filtering process, pulling only that which was relevant out. And so then after that, we had another follow-on program that protected identities until we could prove you were a part of the, you know, if you were a person and taken in as a part of the selection process we were doing based on, you know, your proximity to bad guys in a phone network or email network or something like that. Or, you know, any other kinds of properties, like you're using a satellite phone in the mountains of Afghanistan. You know, that's another thing we have to look at. So it means you have to be looked at. Doesn't mean you're guilty of anything, but you need to look at them. So we call that the zone of suspicion. And so we had a whole process setting up, and we're going to develop the whole thing. We didn't finish it, unfortunately, but in the process, we had a system that simply said if you were pulled into that collection and you weren't already known to be a bad guy of sorts, terrorist or whatever, then all of your identifying data would be encrypted. And so there would be nothing in the database except the encrypted version of your identity. So no one in NSA could tell who you were. They could only know that they're looking at you because you are in proximity to bad guys or have some association with them, so it needs to be checked out. Now, if you find out that you're not part of it, then fine, we take you off. But if you are part, then you're drawn in, and then we get a warrant and uncover you and target you. But that was something that the basic people who started this whole program of bulk collection were Bush, Cheney, President Bush, Vice President Cheney, Hayden, from Director of NSA, and Tenet, Director of CIA. They were the four at the beginning that started it. They approved it, and Hayden's motive was to get more money, build a bigger empire, be a bureaucrat. Cheney's objective was, and he really ran this, I call him Darth Cheney because he went to the dark side. But his objective was to know everything about his political opponents, and basically everybody. So, I mean, he grew up under Nixon. That was Nixon's theme. That was what Watergate was all about.
And it's an interesting time in history because 2001, okay, a few years earlier, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Union. And we have Francis Fukuyama stating now, the American professor stating, this is the end of history. It's liberal democracy now taking over the whole world. And there was a very strong sense of optimism in the American system. We recall 1993, even earlier, Paul Wolfowitz and the entry of the neocons. And I don't know if this is a far stretch, but it looks to me that the Thinthread and the way you collected mass data was really constitutional, and it was still protecting the individual. But the stellar wind and the upcoming programs of mass bulk collection entered into that sort of new way of looking at the Constitution too.
The philosophy is not new. I mean, knowing everything about your country and people in your country and what they're doing, what they're intending, is a historical thing. It goes back to Caesar Augustus and, the pharaohs in Egypt. And anytime people organize into groups or cities or states, people at the top organizing, managing it, want to know what's going on in their people. So to a certain degree, that's what the Constitution says. Here are your limits. As a government, you are not allowed to do certain things. And of course they scrapped those. But it was all done in secret, so it was a secret government making its own decisions on what to do. And looking at everybody, collecting first everybody in the United States, then moving and getting cooperation from the other Five Eyes countries and about 9 others, I think now, from in Europe mostly, but Japan and I think Israel, Poland, and I think some of the Nordic countries are also involved. So, and I would assume that France is too. But what that did was spread that philosophy of bulk collection on everybody and knowing everything about the population in every country that it went to. And, that basically was destroying, I called it a metastasizing malignancy, destroying democracy in the world.
We noticed too from the 1990s, especially onward, we've seen the remarkable rise of a globalist system that has produced, now I do believe Oxfam states, approximately 30 persons, individuals in the world own more than half of world asset. And this transnational business model, internationalist system, is opposed to the nation-state-based and the national sovereignty-based capitalist structure of old, which had the benefits, for example, of taxing its citizens. Now we see internationalist borderless model in which these transnational large corporations don't tax anywhere. This is one of the things, of course, Donald Trump wants them to commit to taxing, getting taxed in the United States.
He's trying to stop that,
So even when looking at the NSA in that kind of light, what are the dangers for other forces than democratic forces to actually take over democracy through this type of and corporate actions?
Well, I think you've just witnessed an attempt to do that, a soft coup in the United States. That was done by the FBI and DOJ in cooperation with the NSA and CIA and to a degree the State Department, orchestrated, I believe, by President Obama. Because in order to do all this, you see, you'd have to have all the departments fall under only one person, and that was the president when he was president. That's also why he opened up the NSA files. He said people, any of the intelligence community agencies can look in and get and watch and look at data from NSA. So that was his way of opening up the possibilities that could compromise what's going on, so that if the FBI or anybody had to investigate, that was tens of thousands of more people they'd have to look at. So that was to cover up and give give protection in a sense to anybody who wanted to subvert what any information they had that would help them subvert the Trump administration they would use. And in fact, they've been spying on him all along. Also his campaign, which is also kind of illegal. It's a subvert. I call it basically treason, because it is in fact subverting the entire foundation of our republic. All of the laws, all of the Constitution, all of the amendments, all of the freedoms that are granted and to people here in the country are being subverted. The First Amendment is scrapped because they look at everybody we associate with, including you now. You're associated with me now, so we're all so that means you don't have free association. Okay, it's free association as long as the government knows. And the Fourth Amendment, of course, because they take all of your content, all of your, everything you're doing, your financial transactions, credit cards, everything. And so that scraps that. And then they use the Fifth Amendment. See, part of the problem is they're using this data to arrest people. And then what they have to do is they do what's called a parallel construction. In other words, the NSA data that they look at, that they used to originally arrest you, is not admissible in a court of law, because it wasn't acquired with a warrant. So in order to get evidence that they could put into the court, they do a parallel construction. They send their people out and assemble the evidence that would also justify your arrest. It helps that they know where it is, so it makes them look really good. In fact, one of the federal agents involved in the program said that he thought this was such a valuable program, we just hope we can keep it secret. Well, I mean, it's called perjury in a court of law, right? It's fabricating evidence. It's all kind of obstruction of justice. What do you want to call it? I mean, any number of things, but it's violation of the Fifth Amendment because they're using your words, or the person who was arrested, their words against them. And then they're violating the Sixth Amendment because they're not giving them due process. In other words, in a court of law, anybody that's in a criminal court charged with something has the right to challenge the discovery of the evidence, initial evidence used to arrest them. Well, they don't give them that. They give them the parallel constructed data. And so that's a violation of due process in the Sixth Amendment, because they can't challenge NSA data in a court because they never see it. They don't even tell the judge or the lawyers involved that that's the basis of it. So the whole thing is, and Mueller was one of the main advocates that he'd been using this program since 2001. And in one of my friends questioned him about that, if he had any legal qualms or any legal problems with parallel construction. Now, Mueller at the time claimed he didn't know what parallel construction was. Well, I mean, he's basically lying through his teeth, because in Bart Gellman's article in March of, I think it was 2011, he had said that they'd been using the Stellar Wind program since 2001. Well, that's the domestic spying program. And it's the NSA's program doing that, content, metadata, everything. So, there are any number of people. The IRS is also using it through the Drug Enforcement Administration. They're also involved in this and looking at it. And so is the State Department and so they get to unmask people and look at them, okay? So the same thing. That's the problem with this That's what I brought up in the Oxford debate, whether or not Snowden was a hero. And the point is that if you give people that kind of knowledge about others, that's power over them, and sooner or later they use it. Well, our government's been using it all along to arrest common crime, mostly drugs and things like that, but also the IRS was looking at for, you know, money laundering and things like that. But the IRS also used it against the Tea Party. You know, the groups over here that were trying to, conservative groups trying to organize to get to become 501c3, tax exempt, to be active, and part of what they would do would be politically active. And so they didn't want that to happen before the 2012 elections, so they slow rolled anybody that was associated. And how did they know they were associated with the Tea Party? Well, all the relationships are in the NSA data, and all they have to do is go look. Who do you have a relationship with? In fact, that's how I got onto them for that, what they were doing, because in one of the interviews, one of the persons who was delayed in getting C1C3 authorization from the IRS, she said, this person said that one of the questions that one of the IRS agents asked was, what is your relationship with this other person? And she gave the name, but I can't remember the name. And I said, that's not the real question. The real question is, how did they know that she had a relationship? I mean, why would they be asking? So, but that tells you that they were looking into the association, the metadata association, and the content and stuff like that.
If we go back to 2001 and 9/11 and that particular period, of course, the NSA at that time and the agencies wanting to have the information pertaining to who might be a potential terrorist. And in the years afterwards, to what degree is the NSA really all about surveillance on everybody politically for the domestic terrorist threat? What is really the aim for this mass surveillance?
Well, I mean, it's they claim, of course, right up front that you have to give up privacy for security.
Yes, yes.
That's a lie. And they knew that because we'd already demonstrated with Thinthread you could get all you needed and actually have a basis for success.
Yes.
Now, but it also gave them the ability to pull in everything. Everything is like a two-edged sword, you know. You can use it for good or you can use it for bad. In this case, they're using it for bad. And they're doing it on everybody, not just in the U.S. And they have a lot of help from the Five Eyes, the other the Brits, Australia, New Zealand, you know, Canada. All the Five Eyes are a part of it, and they're like at least 9 other countries now, and mostly in Europe. But you know, all of that is a collective effort. NSA is basically the storage facility for all of those countries. So they're storing everything. Even the B&D is passing the data on German citizens in to be stored there. It's a violation of their constitution. The committee that I testified to in Germany, the committee investigating the B&D, found that out, I think, about 2 years ago, that they were collecting data on their own citizens, passing it to NSA to store. And that's what they're all doing. And so NSA has become the storage facility, because who else can buy a 1 million square foot storage facility? Or now they're building a 2.8 million square foot facility on Fort Meade. It's almost 3 times the size. Well, when the ever-increasing amount of communications year after year means you have to keep collecting more and more. It takes more and more money to do that, but also, if you're going to store it for any period of time, you need larger and larger storage facilities.
So who benefits from this? Is it politically?
It's basically, it was done for Cheney to start with, but Obama's used it, all of them have used it. Once they have that power, see, that's the problem. Humans are really weak. When you give them power over others, at some time or other, they use it. And so, I mean, for me, it would be a simple thing to purge the database of NSA of all of this so that they couldn't abuse it. That was the whole idea under Thinthread. You purge data out that's not relevant so they can't be abused. That was our objective, and we succeeded at it. And the problem is it only cost $3.2 million to do it. And so they wanted the tens of billions that was going to be invested in the bulk collection. So that meant there was a lot of empire you could build, you know, a lot of power you accumulate, you know, having knowledge of everybody. You now have power. not just of foreign governments, but also of our own government, because they were spying on the U.S. government here, looking at senators, representatives, even Supreme Court justices, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of that. So they wanted to know what anybody who had power over them, what they were intending or thinking, so that you could construct some counter argument, and maybe change their minds.
To what degree is the change from working within a constitutional way of collecting data, like through the Thinthread, to going over that border and actually surveilling everybody? To what degree does that serve a non-democratic interests? Because it's just a worry that we see coming from Europe and taking a look at the United States. You having the greatest constitution, I do believe, in the modern history.
As long as we live by it,
Yeah, and the Bill of Rights. Us who come from Africa, I was raised in Africa, lived in South America, and lived in the Middle East for many years. We're used to autocratic systems in which people are not allowed free speech in any possible way whatsoever. And we see the way this system has worked here, with at least some less level of corruption than what we see in some of the African states that we come from, for example. I mean, what kind of development does this speak for pertaining to the development in the American state?
Well, you see, what you were talking about in Africa is basically happening here. If you oppose or try to expose this government and what they're doing, you lose your job. You get attacked by the FBI, the CIA, or even the Department of Justice. They try to put you in jail. They did that with us, right? When we were staying in channels doing this, complaining as we were supposed to do. So they tried to fabricate evidence to put us behind bars and charge us with the Espionage Act, put us behind bars, and for 35 years.
So 35 years?
Yeah. Yep. And it was done by fabricating evidence and falsifying affidavits and falsifying indictments. The data, and the difference is we're not in jail because I basically caught them at it. In other words, I had assembled the evidence to show malicious prosecution on the part of the Department of Justice of the United States. This is a felony, okay? When you fabricate evidence and submit it to a court of law, that's a felony. They go to jail for that too. So I basically told the Department of Justice that I had all this evidence, and I gave them the evidence that I had, and I said, let's go to court. We're going to charge you when you do it. It was the third time they tried to indict us. That was my response to their third attempt to indict us. That's my government that used to be a republic, a constitutional republic, and we're not anymore.
And on that note, thank you very much, Mr. William Binney, leading whistleblower here in the United States of America, for taking the time to joining us here and speaking about the mass surveillance state and the NSA. Thank you very much.
Thank you.